Okay, let's get started. It's very interesting that we are starting the Torah again at this moment in time because our hearts and minds and souls are all focused on Israel right now and how we can help support our brothers and sisters in Israel. And it's really fascinating that the opening words of the Torah, and especially the opening commentary of Rashi on the Torah, is addressing something which is in the headlines of the news these days about the claim that the Jewish people have for the land of Israel. So I think the timing of this this parsha, obviously there's always a connection between the Torah reading of that particular week and current events. But in this case, I think it's quite obvious. It's even more obvious than most times what the connection is between the Torah reading of today and the situation that the Jewish people find themselves in today, in particular with everything that's going on in our homeland. Okay, so before we get into that, we're going to talk about some big ideas today, which is the very definition of the Torah and the mission of Judaism, the purpose of creation. Before we get into that, the question that I have for you is as follows. Do you know anyone that has a particular hobby that is more than a hobby, but it might have started off as a hobby, but it actually turned into a lifestyle? That when you talk about this person's life, this hobby becomes a major component of their life. Do you know anyone like that?
Myself.
Yourself. Okay. All right. So I'm going to give you some examples of hobbies that can turn into lifestyles. One example is yoga. Another example might be surfing or gardening or veganism. There are certain things that people do that actually turn into an entire lifestyle, and everything they do revolves around that. So we're going to talk about that in the context of the Torah and about Judaism. Okay. So the opening act of the Bible, the opening act of the Torah, is the story of creation. And here you have it on the screen. Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. In the beginning of God's creation of the heavens and the earth. And the Torah describes the various things that God created on each of the 6 days, followed by God resting on the Sabbath. And it seems like a no-brainer. If you're starting a book that's going to become a world classic, where do you start? You start at the beginning. So you start when the world was created. Makes sense. But let's think about that for a moment. Is the Torah meant to be a history book? If the Torah was a history book, then recording the evolution of the world and mankind, then it would make sense to start with the beginning, with creation. But if you were to put a If you were to give the Torah a subtitle, would you say that history of the world would be the subtitle of the Torah? Probably not. What would be an appropriate subtitle if you were going to publish the Torah? What would you say would be a good subtitle for the work? Any ideas?
Lesson for Jewish people.
Lessons for Jewish people. Okay. Any other ideas?
Guide for life.
Yeah, a guide for life.
A guide for life. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there's more. There's more to the Torah than simply being a documentary of world history, right? What is the Torah all about? What is the message that the Torah is trying to convey? And once we understand this message, we'll appreciate what Judaism is. Because if Torah is the flagship book that describes Judaism, however we define Torah is going to reflect on not just the history of the world, but on what the message of Judaism is for the world. So what is Judaism? What is the theme? What is the message of Judaism? If we had to encapsulate it, what would we say?
The history of our people.
The history of our people is part of it. Well, that's true. But there's more to it than that. In other words, if you're talking about the history of our people and you're limiting it to that, then somebody who's not Jewish has no need for Torah. Right? If we claim that Judaism has a message for the world, then it can't just be limited to the history of the Jewish people. It has to be a universal message.
Rabbi Goldman?
Yeah.
You have to look and see what's in. I have so many thoughts in my head and so many words that you're expressing about the beginning. I just said that to Bruce. Bruce and I were sitting here, and I said to him, it's like we get a new beginning. What's going to happen now? It's a new start. It's a new year. Is it going to change? Is what happened in Israel going to open to something bigger and better? Will it get better, or is it going to? I don't know what's going to happen, but I think about all that stuff, and then, it's just what an appropriate parsha for this week. You couldn't have said it any better.
We're gonna talk about all of that and as it relates to Israel, but first, my question is: if you were to write one sentence that conveys the overarching theme of Judaism, what would that sentence be?
Light into the nations.
So Jews are meant to be a light unto the nations.
The story of life.
The story of life. Okay. Well, let's have a look at how the Encyclopedia Britannica defines Judaism. They call it
economic and social justice, we will shut down the big three. And depending on how long a game United Auto Workers are willing to play,
we're not able to hear.
This could last weeks or even months.
Somebody has.
Just some background noise. Do you mind muting yourself if you're not speaking?
When we talk about the future of the automotive industry,
Okay, thanks. Anyone who's not speaking, if you could just please mute yourself so we don't have background noise, that would be helpful. Anytime you want to speak, just unmute yourself. Okay, so this is how the encyclopedia defines it. Judaism, monotheistic religion developed among the ancient Hebrews. Judaism is characterized by belief in one transcendent God who revealed himself to Abraham, Moses, and the Hebrew prophets, and by a religious life in accordance with scriptures and rabbinic traditions. Judaism is the complex phenomenon of a total way of life for the Jewish people, comprising theology, law, and innumerable cultural traditions. What jumps out about you about this definition of Judaism? What do you think about it? Is it a good one? Let's have a look at the opening line of Rashi. Rashi's commentary is the most famous of all Torah commentaries. On the words, on the opening line, that in the beginning God created heaven and earth, Rashi comments as follows. And this is going to be a commentary that is going to be a little hard to understand at face value, so bear with me. We're going to unpack it. He says as follows. In the beginning, said Rabbi Yitzchak, it was not necessary to begin the Torah except with the first commandment that the Israelites were commanded. Now, for what reason did he commence with in the beginning? And he answers, because of the verse, the strength of his works he related to his people, to give them the inheritance of the nations. For if the nations of the world should say to Israel, you are robbers, for you conquered by force the lands of the 7 nations of Canaan, they will reply, the entire earth belongs to the Holy One, blessed be He. He created it, which is what we learn from the story of creation, and gave it to whomever He deemed proper when He wished. He gave it to them, and when He wished, He took it away from them and gave it to us. Now, again, there's a lot in this text which we need to unpack, but there's an assumption here that Rashi is making, where the person whose question is assuming something. There's an assumption that the Torah is a religious document, a manual for life. Somebody said before that the Torah is a guide for life, right? If the Torah were simply a manual and a guide for life, the question is, why does the Torah not begin with the first commandment? There are 613 rules and regulations, do's and don'ts within the Torah. If the Torah is simply a manual for how Jews should live their lives, delete the whole book of Genesis, fast forward to Exodus 12:2, where the Torah begins with the first commandment that the Jewish people were given as they were becoming a nation in Egypt, the commandment to establish a calendar that runs according to that celebrates the beginning of each month, a lunar month, and that would be the beginning of the Torah. So the question is, why do we need the story of creation? Why does the Torah begin with the whole story of the creation and the history of mankind, going on to Adam and Noah and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob? Why is this all necessary? It's not a history book. It's a religious book that tells us how to lead our lives. It's a manual for life. Right? The Maharal a 16th century scholar, writes that the title Torah really only refers to the mitzvahs in the Torah. For the etymology of the Hebrew word Torah comes from the word hora'ah, which means instruction. It's an instruction manual, right? So if the Torah is essentially an instruction manual, a guide for how to lead our lives, it should document the mitzvot, the commandments. So if the Torah is the flagship document of Judaism and it's a religious document, it makes sense to start off with instructions. Why do we need to know how the world was created? Why is that included in the Torah, which is our manual for life? What does he answer this question with? He answers the question with some type of real estate debate. The rights to real estate. We're talking about this grand question: what is Torah? What is Judaism? Right? And we said if the Torah is a religious document, it deserves a more appropriate opening. What does this have to do with an argument, with a debate about real estate, about the land of Israel? Who owns Israel? So how do we interpret the answer of Rashi? How does it answer the question as to what exactly is the Torah? So here is where we come to the really a deeper understanding of why the Torah begins with creation. And that has nothing to do with real estate contention, but rather with the nature of Judaism and our very mission on earth. So normally, the way the world operates, there are certain unwritten rules. There are certain terms that we accept in the world. And one of those terms is that anything holy belongs in one corner, anything ordinary, mundane, belongs in another corner. So if you have a rabbi, the rabbi belongs in the synagogue. Other people, they belong in their offices, working for a living. Now, if the rabbi wants to become a CEO, he could resign his job as a rabbi, and he can become a CEO of a company. But you can't be a rabbi and a CEO. Either you're in the synagogue or you're in the office. In our personal lives, we all do spiritual things from time to time. We pray, we study, we do mitzvahs. But then, what about the rest of the time? What about the rest of the time when we're not actively doing something holy? We live the rest of our lives when we're not doing religious things. So if we're playing golf, or we're working, or we're on vacation, or we're sleeping, or we're eating, we're not really doing the religious part of life. We're doing the other part of life. So most of the time, the rules of the game are that when you're doing holy things, you do holy things, you focus on that. And when you're doing ordinary, mundane things, you focus on that. You don't mix the two. And it's not only about activities, but it's also place. If you're talking about not just holy activities, but you're talking about holy spaces, just like the synagogue is considered a spiritual home, in contrast to my ordinary home, which is neutral. It's not holy. It's not unholy. It's a neutral space. So you have holy spaces, you have unholy spaces, and then you have neutral spaces. So if you want to look at a country, the land of Israel is holy. It's a holy land. And why is it called a holy land? It says that God's providence extends over the land of Israel more so than any other land. So actually, Judaism comes along and crashes the party. You want to separate your life into mundane and holy. You want to separate time into holy and unholy, space into holy and unholy. Judaism comes with a whole new revolutionary approach and says that's not how it works. It's not enough to dedicate some part of your life to Judaism and then go home and be an ordinary person. Judaism demands that every part of our life be infused with the values of Judaism. So when you're eating like a Jew. When you're sleeping like a Jew. When you're on vacation, you go on vacation like a Jew. In other words, there is no separation between the holy and the ordinary parts of our lives. It's all one. Judaism wants us to look at our lives as one holistic idea, all infused with a common theme. And this goes against the way we normally view life. In the words of the Rebbe, every Jew is charged with a mission of Torah and mitzvahs, which represent the spiritual Israel. But beyond that, every Jew is instructed that all of your actions should be for the sake of heaven. You should know God in all your ways. In other words, it's not just that we're serving God when we pray, when we study Torah, or we're actively doing a mitzvah, but throughout the entire 24 hours of the day, even when we're involved in mundane, ordinary, bodily matters, Judaism saturates everything we do so that our entire life becomes a spiritual life. So this is a revolutionary idea that I don't know of any other religion that demands this, right? In fact, forget about religion. Most people, even most Jews, might reject this way of thinking. Why should every part of my life be saturated with God? I'm in the shower. I have to be serving God. I'm taking a shower. Leave me alone. I'm eating breakfast. I'm giving plenty of time to God. He has his time. There's a schedule. I have part of my schedule is dedicated to God. Why does God have to encroach on my personal life? I want to go on vacation. Leave me alone. Rashi comes along and he says, essentially, this is the claim that other nations have towards Israel, towards the Jewish nation. They claim that we stole their land. And the deeper meaning behind this claim is that we are robbers. Why are we robbers? What does Israel represent? Israel represents spirituality, godliness. Judaism is trying to grab, is trying to rob more than she's entitled to. Israel is a spiritual concept. It has a place, it has a time. Okay, we accept that. But to take an ordinary piece of land, part of a country, a part of the earth, a material land, and radically declare that this land is holy, that's not fair. That's a land grab. Since when does a land become holy? So the non-Jews claim this is robbery. The claim is that matters belonging to the non-Jewish worldly domain ought to remain in their possession. Accordingly, in the non-Jewish perspective, the notions of conquering land and expanding the borders of holiness are outright robbery. Think about it. What does it mean to be a holy land? Land is a material, something material, something physical. How could the land itself be holy? We have this phenomenon with Jacob and Esau. Esau understood that he had agreement with his brother Jacob that heaven, the world to come, would belong to Jacob, and Esau would be able to keep whatever he wants in this world. Now, Jacob resisted this notion, and he lived a life where his spiritual life and his material life merged together. And the Midrash describes Esau's reaction. He felt this is a violation. This is a violation to everything that we agreed on. Esau says to Jacob, sell me your birthright. So when Jacob, says the Midrash, when Jacob and Esau were in their mother's womb, Jacob said to Esau, my brother, there are two worlds in front of us. This world, earth, and the next world, heaven. This world has eating, drinking, business, marriage, and family. The world to come has none of the above. Would you like to take this world and I'll take the next? That's what the deeper meaning of that verse is, where it says, sell me your birthright. Esau immediately rejected the notion of resurrection of the dead. As the verse says, I'm going to die. At that moment, Esau took his portion in this world and Jacob took his portion in the next. When Jacob returned from Laban's house and Esau saw his large family and domestic servants, he says to him, my brother, did we not agree that you would take the world to come and I would take this world? Where did you get all this money to enjoy? So Esau can't stand that Jacob has material wealth if his exclusive domain is supposed to be spiritual. So Esau, and by extension, non-Jewish nations, resist all efforts to merge the divine with the mundane. They want to keep them totally separate. This world and the next world, material and spiritual, heaven and earth, matter and spirit, do not mix the two. And by the way, this is not limited to non-Jews. This is not limited to Esau and Jacob. You have religious Jews as well who might suffer from this idea, who might not appreciate this notion. For example, you might have somebody that observes Shabbat, and they say, on Shabbat, I feel so connected to God. I feel so holy. I feel so spiritual. What about the rest of the week? Why are you feeling more Jewish on Shabbat than the rest of the week? Yes, Shabbat is a holy day when we have less engagement with the material world. But the goal of Judaism is to bring holiness into every part of our lives, not to be limited with only feeling holy on Shabbat. So Judaism says going to synagogue is obviously holy. But you could be holy going to work as well. You could be holy going to a baseball game. You could be holy, you could be serving God whenever you take an ordinary experience and use it for a holy purpose to serve God. When essentially, when you're conscious, when you're mindful of serving God in every area of life, no matter what you're doing, as long as it's permissible, we're not talking about violating the Torah, as long as it's a permissible act, and you're doing that in a way of serving God, essentially what you're doing is conquering hostile territory and bringing it into God's camp. That's waging a war. So Judaism makes this bold revolutionary claim that everything we do can be sacred, can be holy, can be godly. And it's our job to introduce more holiness into our ordinary lives. Every mitzvah we do, but even if we're not doing a mitzvah in the obvious sense, even if we're just doing our normal routines, if we're doing it with the right approach, with the right perspective, and we're doing it to serve God, it can become a sacred experience. The only exception, the only exclusion to that is if we're doing something that is clearly forbidden in the Torah. There's no way to sanctify that. There's no way to eat pork and to say, I'm going to use the energy that I get from this bacon to serve God. No, that doesn't work that way because God commanded you not to eat pork. But as long as you're eating kosher food and you're mindful of the opportunity you have to take the energy you're getting from eating this meal, even if it's a delicious meal which you're enjoying, there's no problem with that. As long as you say the blessing and you're mindful of utilizing the energy that you're getting from this eating experience and using it to serve God, to further your mission. Is it clear? Any questions so far?
No questions here.
No questions. So you're with me, right? Okay. So we said before that the term Holy Land might be looked at some people as a contradiction. How could you have an earthly material part of land, like a land, and say that this land is holy, right? You're taking stuff that normally belongs to the material world and claiming it as part of your spiritual world. That's a land grab. How is that possible? The reason it's possible is because our belief in the creator of the world. God, who created the universe, created this universe for a purpose, wants us to help create this environment in his world to transform the world into a holy place. God created Israel, God created America, God created France, and God created Turkey. They're not the same. There's morning prayers and there's morning breakfast. Two different things. But the same God who created morning prayers created morning breakfast. And the same God who created the land of Israel created the United States of America. So Judaism's message is a response to those other nations who say, how can you have a holy land? How can you claim that a certain land is holy? Isn't that a land grab? The answer to that, the rebuttal is in the opening words of the Torah, where it says, Bereshis bara Elokim, in the beginning of God's creation. If we establish that God is creator of the universe, everything belongs to God, the entire earth belongs to God. If it belongs to him, he has the right to give it to whomever he pleases. When we work with material matters, they appear to be outside of the jurisdiction of holiness. Why? Because God granted them that jurisdiction. Due to the sin of the tree of knowledge, God's desire was that mundane matters should appear to be under the jurisdiction of the world. However, that was by design, so that thereafter it should be given into Jewish ownership. God wants a Jew to take that mundane matter and bring it back into the realm of holiness as it was prior to the sin. This is the Jewish people's mission and task of conquering the land. So the opening story, the opening act of the Torah is creation. Not, here's a Jewish people, I'm going to give you your rules, your commandments, your mitzvahs. The opening act, we know, sets the tone for the entire story. That means that if the Torah starts with creation, there's a reason for it. Because this story is going to inform everything that comes afterwards. So the fact that the Torah begins with creation and not the mitzvahs for the Jews tells us that creation is the story of Torah. Creation is the story of Judaism. It's not just that God created a religion and decided to give us a way of life, a manual for how to live our lives. That's included in the Torah, but that's not all that Torah is. God created an entire universe. And every part of that universe belongs to God. So we talked earlier about the split that we have between materialism and spirituality. If Judaism is all about being religious and being righteous and pious, then you could say, when I'm in the synagogue, I'm in my holy mode. And when I'm at home, I'm in my mundane mode. Judaism is not just about religion. It's not only about how to serve God in openly religious ways. Judaism is a way of life. And it's about realizing God's presence in every single area of my life. So sometimes I could accomplish that in a mundane experience, even more so than in a religious experience. I could be having lunch with a friend. I can be walking in the street. I can be doing, playing a game, whatever I'm doing, and find a way to connect it to my essential mission in life, which is to serve God. And that it turns that whole experience into a holy act. So the idea of introducing God into every experience of life allows us to integrate the various parts of our life so that there's a seamless story of finding God in everything. And it all comes from our faith in God as creator of the universe. There was a purpose to this creation. Okay. So now there's a beautiful text here from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory, who was the former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom. And he writes as follows: in many other faiths, life down here on earth, with its loves, losses, triumphs, and defeats, is not the highest value. Heaven is to be found in life after death, or the soul in unbroken communion with God, or in acceptance of the world that is. Life is eternity. Life is serenity. Life is free of pain. But that for Judaism is not quite life. It may be noble. It may be spiritual. It may be sublime. But it's not life in all its passion, responsibility, and risk. Judaism teaches us how to find God down here on earth, not up there in heaven. It means engaging with life, not taking refuge from it. It seeks not so much happiness as joy, the joy of being with others and together with them, making a blessing over life. It means taking the risk of love, commitment, loyalty. It means living for something larger than the pursuit of pleasure or success. It means daring greatly. Judaism does not deny pleasure, for it is not ascetic. It does not worship pleasure. Judaism is not hedonist. Instead, it sanctifies pleasure. It brings the divine presence into the most physical acts, eating, drinking, intimacy. We find God not just in the synagogue, but in the home, the house of study, acts of kindness. We find God in community, hospitality, and wherever we mend some of the fractures of our human world. So that's Judaism. It's a way of life. It's about creating a relationship with God. And once we establish that we're in a relationship that's important to us, is with us all the time. We feel God's presence at every moment. It saturates everything we do. And so, regardless of what activity we are engaged in at the moment, we can be Jewish in that experience. We can feel our relationship with God in that experience. And we can choose to connect it to our larger mission and purpose in the world. So I want to hear your thoughts about how this is connected to the current situation in Israel that we are all feeling and thinking about. And there's the soldiers that need to protect the Jewish people in Israel. They're doing their job on the battlefield, and they're doing an important job. They're doing holy thing. It might not seem like a holy thing to do, to go out there with a weapon and protect, be there on the battlefield. But in fact, the way the brave soldiers of the Israel Defense Forces are acting right now is the holiest type of act you could think of. It's a mitzvah. They're literally sacrificing, risking their lives to protect others. And they're waging a war of good versus evil. That's very clear. But for those of us who are not trained soldiers, those of us who are not serving in the IDF at this moment in time, we have to know that we can also be part of this battle of good over evil. We can use spiritual weapons that we have at our disposal to fight the enemy that represents evil. And again, we can do mitzvahs. We should increase in our mitzvahs. We should increase in our prayers. We should increase in our Torah study. All of these things are extremely vital, and in terms of the current battle that is being waged. But even more than that, when we remember that Judaism is something which impacts every single dimension, every single part of our life, then we're fighting this war. We're fighting this battle of good over evil in whichever way we're doing it, as long as we're serving God, as long as we're doing it in a way that God approves of. As long as it's, like I said before, it's a permissible act, we can turn an ordinary, mundane experience into something sacred, into something holy. And that's our goal, that's our mission, that's what we live for. Any thoughts or comments or questions? No? Everybody's stunned, quiet,
Thinking.
thinking. Okay.
Thinking, definitely.
Thinking. All right. Hopefully this is providing some additional food for thought, and we can internalize some of these ideas and implement them in our own lives in a way that we can make a difference and spread more light in the face of extreme darkness. We have to use extreme measures to bring more and more light into this world. And we are confident that light will overpower darkness, good will overpower evil, and in the end,
Right.
the forces of good will be victorious.
It just says light and good. Why do rabbis wear black hats instead of white hats?
You can ask him.
No, you ask.
No. Oh, Rabbi Goldman, Brucey has a silly question for you to
What's
lighten it up.
what's the silly
To
question?
lighten,
This will lighten it up.
to
a bit,
lighten
I
it
think.
up a little
So,
bit.
Okay, so you were talking about how, light's going to power over darkness and good over evil and all that. So, and traditionally, we see the bad guys wear black hats and the good guys wear white hats. Are you there?
I'm listening.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was wondering why don't, all Chabads wear black hats?
That's the whole point. You're going into the trenches, into the darkness, and trying to turn it into light.
I love it.
Hey,
I
there you
love
go.
it.
There's your answer. There's your answer.
See, it's easy to wear a white hat. The challenge is to wear the black hat and turn it into white.
I hope that lightened it up a little bit for everybody because it's really tough right now. I know.
Yeah. Well, again, the fact that each of us is doing whatever we can in our own little way to study more Torah, to do more prayers, to do more mitzvahs, is literally bringing salvation. That I know firsthand. I have friends that are soldiers and send messages of how appreciative they are of our partnership with them, even though they're on the battlefield and waging this war in the physical sense. They appreciate that thousands and thousands of people are doing good deeds in their honor and partnering with them and waging this spiritual battle as well.
Amen.
So let's just keep it up, and God willing, we're going to see
Next week we'll have good news.
We're going to see tremendous miracles because God is protecting us. All right.
Thank you, Ralph.
Thank you,